Hi everybody, Joe here from Chill Division, and today we're going to take a look at what's in an offtake agreement. Now you might be asking, what is an offtake agreement? It's a really good question. Let's say that you are a cultivator and you want to then sell that to somebody else. Traditionally this will be done in the form of an offtake agreement. Now having an offtake agreement is a requirement by the Ministry of Health and the Medicinal Cannabis Agency before you can actually obtain a license to get started cultivating here in New Zealand. So it is a bit of a catch-22. You have to have an offtake agreement in place, but not have a license to actually cultivate that product to begin with. So it can be a little bit dicey there. But basically what it means is that if I were to cultivate, let's say 20 kilos worth of a particular strain, and it meets certain sterility requirements, and it is, let's say for example 20% THC, then my offtake buyer will take anything off of my hands that I can produce up to a certain level of, like for example 20 kilos, 50 kilos, 100 kilos a month, a quarter for example. Now the reason that we're going to be talking about this is because it is being hosted by the US government. So it's here on the SEC Archives website, and it looks like there was a liquidation. I believe this was by Buffalo Bioscience and Wellness. They went into liquidation or something to that effect. Now, the blurb that I have here says Buffalo Bioscience is the holder of one of a limited number of licenses issued in Lesotho for the production of medicinal cannabis products. Now, that's somewhere in South Africa, basically. What we can do is let's just quickly go full screen here as well. Cool, and so let's get into taking a look at this example offtake agreement between Cantourage. They're one of the larger distributors, importers, product manufacturers, whatever, in the world. So it's quite cool that we can take a look at this, because usually these are hidden behind NDAs. Now some of these are going to be directly applicable, some of these are going to be completely irrelevant for us because the New Zealand minimum quality standards are still stricter than this. However, if you were to be, let's say you have an offtake agreement with somebody who wants to sell as part of this to Cantourage, they will probably impose stricter requirements on you as a cultivator in order to meet their offtake agreement as well. So we have it here. Cantourage is a manufacturer and pharmacy wholesaler of cannabis for medicinal use. Buffalo is a producer and cultivator of medicinal cannabis products. So the way that it works here, so Cantourage are going to be buying, Buffalo are going to be selling. We'll skim through most of these because they're kind of a little bit boring there. Let's keep going. Brands and labeling. Cantourage shall distribute and sell the end products. In other words, they're not going to be labeled as Buffalo. They'll be labeled as Cantourage products. Order fulfillment, pricing, here we go. Buffalo shall pay to Cantourage the prices specified. Right. In Annex 3. This is for if there's any recalls. For each end product delivered to and paid by a distributor, Buffalo shall invoice Cantourage, and Cantourage are going to then pay Buffalo the minimum purchase price plus tax. Where are we? Shall be payable if they haven't received. Yeah, okay. So in other words, Cantourage are going to receive the product from Buffalo. They are then going to dry it out some more, they're going to trim it a little bit more, they're going to package it up, and they're going to ship it off to a distributor, for example, like a local pharmacy or that kind of thing. When Cantourage give it over to a local dispensary or pharmacy, that is when they'll basically send a message to Buffalo and go, okay, cool, we've sent off, I don't know, let's say 100 kilos, flick us an invoice and we'll pay it for you. Cantourage will calculate the purchase price, and they'll pay within like 14 days there. Yeah, cool. They go into the the pricing details a little bit further down. Quality and inspection, basically it says that Buffalo should inspect it and do testing prior to sending it to Cantourage, and you need to include the COAs with it as well. Cantourage will also do their own additional COAs upon receipt, just to make sure that things haven't been misrepresented, for example. If there is additional costs incurred by Cantourage, and it turns out that, like let's say for example they agreed that it would be 20% THC minimum or 18% THC minimum, but this particular one comes out at 16.5%, then Buffalo are basically going to have to pay for those costs for Cantourage to do that testing so that they're not wasting their time. There are recall procedures. It says here, either party shall be obliged to maintain business liability insurance for at least 1 million euros per claim for damage. So that's approximately 1.8 million New Zealand, I believe, at the moment. Obsolescence, provision of materials, yeah, nothing too exciting. Here we go. Duties to inform inspection rights. So Cantourage can inspect Buffalo and their cultivation facilities as well, which is kind of interesting, kind of cool. They're basically allowed to show up within like a couple of days and just have a look, if you will. Import and export regulations. Yeah, let's keep skipping down here. So again, it's worth noting that a lot of this is, although it's for export, if you have an offtake agreement with somebody domestically and this person themselves is trying to export, they will oftentimes pass on a lot of these other requirements to you with their offtake agreement. Here we go. So confidentiality as well. You're not supposed to disclose it, but that's okay for us to talk about it because hosted on the SEC website. Thank you, American government. Applicable law, venue, integral parts of the agreement. Let's keep skimming down. Final provisions, and it gets signed off on. So paper audit here. So they need to have a valid cultivation license. They've got to have representative COAs for the product as well. Additional self-disclosure and a basic statement on the use of pesticides and fertilizers. Now this will quite probably include the statement with each paper audit basically saying, no, we have not done any gamma irradiation or something to that effect. Auditing Buffalo on site to check conformity of Buffalo with GACP guidelines, right? So they require that you have GACP certification or are adherent to their guidelines. I don't know if it stipulates here that you have to have using checklists, right? So you just have to adhere to those guidelines. It doesn't, I believe, state that Buffalo themselves actually have to have GACP. It just says they have to adhere to those guidelines, and Cantourage can do an audit of Buffalo. Interesting. That's cool. Product definition, working with the guidelines specified in the European Medicinal Book for Herbals and Drugs and the European Pharmacopoeia. And Buffalo has to have a narcotic registration. Yeah, okay, cool. Alrighty. We'll keep skimming down because we'll get to the real interesting stuff real shortly. Here we go. Import management, so arranging a pickup at a German airport. Fulfillment of all relevant aspects for customs clearance, responsibility for the products from the German airport, and it's going to stay between 15 to 25 degrees Celsius. That's interesting. 15 to 25 C is cool. Quality management, they'll check everything, they'll make sure they've got COAs. Carrying out a quality control of the sample. That's not the kind of quality control that you think it is. Haha. We'll keep going down here. Order fulfillment. Yeah, same deal at the other end as well. So they want it at all times between 15 and 25 degrees. The humidity and air quality are continuously monitored. The product is kept safe and secure. And this is in order to keep it with Yeah, here we go. Always stored in an anesthetic warehouse under GMP conditions, which is kind of interesting. Here we go. They will pay at the end of it. Blah, blah, blah. Refinement. Product transformation. So what they're basically saying here is that they're going to receive your product. They will do some trimming. So because you're only allowed to include the sugar leaves, for example, you're not allowed to include any of the larger fan leaves. They will do further trimming of the product in order to trim it. They will do some post-treatment if necessary. Now, this is interesting because I'm not aware of any permitted post-treatments that aren't things like gamma irradiation that Cantourage may be using, unless they're doing things like what we've been talking about with peracetic acid, but I haven't heard anything either way. Additional drying if necessary. They will package it, so Cantourage is who we're talking about here. Cantourage are going to do packaging, they're going to label it in accordance with the manufacturing regulations, and then we're going to do further testing. In other words, they're going to get like COAs, they're going to make sure that there's no bacteria, they're going to make sure that there's no heavy metals and that kind of thing, and then they're going to release it to their distributors. Now this is interesting too. It says here, in the course of the refinement, which is basically treatment here, there will be trimming and drying losses as well as retentions and testing provisions that will not be included into the end product. So in other words, if you've shipped, let's say you've shipped over there 20 kilos, because they're going to do additional trimming and things like that, it might only come down to, let's say, 16 kilos worth. And then after that, they spend one of those 16 kilos also getting tested, sent off for things like heavy metals testing, like we mentioned before, and that sort of stuff. And that's not going to be included in the end product and what you get paid for, which is a bit of a bummer. Cantourage will make the best endeavours to sell the trimming losses, and any profit will be split between the two parties as per a normal sale outlined in the contract. Buffalo owns the trimming losses and has the right to request they ship the product to another party at Buffalo's cost. In other words, if you want the trim, they can send it back to you, which is kind of cool. Here we go. So this is the actual offtake requirements, like the specifics, if you will, for the product and what your cannabis has to be. So if we have a look here, the test parameter is how it looks. The testing method is organoleptic. And the specification is that it should be cannabis. The color green, gray green, or brown green. That excludes anything that's like purple, or even some of those darker sort of navy blues, or even some of the ones that we've seen which are like whitish. So that would be interesting to see how things like the color of space, for example, would be approved, because it has a lot more than just those three colors. Really good question. But this also means that you can't have things like necrosis, chlorosis, which will often cause like a yellowing and that sort of thing as well. The odor, it has to smell like cannabis. It can't smell like it's gone off or anything like that. Now this is really cool. The macroscopic identity of present cannabis flowers, and they've gone through this beautiful description of what cannabis looks like. Basically, you're going to have like resin-covered bud is what they're after, along with some sugar leaves. No visible sign of diseases or pest contamination. Now, foreign material must be under 2%. Your loss on drying should be 10 to 15%. This is interesting because I believe we have other requirements here in New Zealand. Total ash, a maximum of 20% after you've burned it, in keeping with the European Pharmacopoeia 2.4.16. Now, this is actually interesting given that we are not permitted for any kind of smoking, and so I wonder how that would behave differently for vaping here in New Zealand. Interesting. Anyway, heavy metals, I believe that we also test for a couple more than just those three. Pesticides must comply with the European Pharmacopoeia 2.8.13, which I believe a lot of our minimum quality standards here in New Zealand are based on. Let's have a quick look. Pesticides, here we go. No, I'm sure there's more pesticide details. Here we go. List of pesticide active ingredients. So these are all of the things that you are permitted to use domestically in terms of pesticides. However, it's worth comparing these to the European Pharmacopoeia because these may be different. Anyway, back to the offtake agreement. Here we go. Microbiological quality. So this is in keeping with the European Pharmacopoeia section 2.6.31. Now here in New Zealand we use for inhalation 5.1.4, and if you're making a tea, it's 5.1.8C. So their total aerobic microbial count is 2.5 times 10 to the power of 6, and 2.5 times 10 to the power of 5 for your total yeast and mold. Now here in New Zealand we have 2 times 10 to the power of 2 and 2 times 10 to the power of 1. So in other words, that's, I believe they work that out as being like 500,000 or something like that, and we're allowed 200. So that'll be, yeah, it's ridiculous. Bile-tolerant gram-negative bacteria, BTGN, as a maximum, like that's heaps. I don't believe we are permitted to have any of that in New Zealand under the New Zealand minimum quality standards, and making sure that there's no E. coli and that sort of thing. The THC content here must be between 90% and 110% of the content separately agreed in text form of the specified product. In other words, so we're a little bit different here for our dried flower in that we allow 80 to 120% in New Zealand. However, like let's say for example you're specifying 20% THC, it means that your product under this particular offtake agreement is allowed 10% deviation. So of that 20%, you can go down to 18 and up to 22%, which is kind of cool. It's still a little bit of variation, enough that you don't have to only use your tops or your premium bud, for example, and get rid of the other stuff. Here we go. Price for wrap service, 420,000 euros. Oh, I believe that was for, yeah, okay. Because I do a whole bunch of stuff here. Social media, 15,000 euros. Jeepers. Whole lot of fun stuff. Homepage, direct HCP access. I'm not actually too sure what that is. Listing at wholesalers, information materials, blah, blah, blah. Pharmaceutical representatives. Jeepers. Anyway, that's a lot of money. Purchase price. So here they define it as the average selling price per gram times 70%. The average at the moment is 2.8 euros, which is just over 5 New Zealand dollars. I believe it's $5.05. So in other words, what they're going to do is the average selling price times 70%. The minimum purchase price that Entourage will pay Buffalo is 2.8 euros. So that's the minimum. So in other words, you're getting a minimum of $5 a gram under this. However, if this is not the kind of agreement that you're likely to have, you're more likely, if you are starting up in New Zealand, to use a middleman and a broker who will also take a cut. The selling price will be set by Entourage in its own discretion. So in other words, the higher the THC, they're more than likely going to be able to sell it for more. So if you picture that's kind of like your base starting amount, for example, 2.8 euros. Let's say, for example, you have a really potently smelling product that's testing at 20% THC, but everybody loves the look of it and the smell of it, and so they're selling it. Let's say they're selling it at like 4 euros. What's 4 euros in NZD? They're selling it at $7.20 New Zealand. That means that yeah, they will take the average selling price and give you 70% of that. So 70% of $7.20 is going to be like, what do we, $6.50-ish? Something to that effect. That can't be right. Let's just go 7.22 divided by 100 times 70. So you get $5. That sounds a bit better. Yeah, interesting. Quality assurance agreement. Let's keep going down. Legal. Quality control. And I think that's mostly it. Yeah, here we go. So there's a few other things that you've got to have. Follow applicable current and GACP and locally imposed requirements. So Buffalo have to include that. Follow GACP basically. But again, this doesn't say that you must be GACP certified. You just have to follow those requirements, which is interesting. Entourage are going to be GMP certified, and they've got to follow GMP guidelines. Defined in the monographs of German and European pharmacopoeia. Interesting. You've got to have a complaints process. Yeah. Follows a written qualification master plan. That's Buffalo. You've got to keep documents for at least 5 years. Again, it's Buffalo. These are the details that you've got to include when you are shipping it. So you've got to include the name, like your strain, the batch number 1 of 2, 3, whatever. How big the package is, like 1 kilo, for example. Where it was manufactured, when you harvested it, where you packaged it, when you packaged it, where it got tested at. What kind of testing it was done. Was it HPLC for potency, or was it something like heavy metals? You've got to include all of those details. The results, otherwise pass, fail, blah, blah, blah. When you got it actually tested as well. Yeah, which is kind of cool. You've got to include labeling, details, storage. You've got to maintain storage facilities. Yeah, cool. They will have labs. They've got to be recall procedures as well. And I think that's us for the most part. We scroll down a little bit more. Yeah, here we go. Annex 5 in products. And so they mention here you can have up to 500,000 CFUs per gram. Again, so these are the two things that are worth being mindful of, because if you are, let's say for example, you're a legacy cultivator in New Zealand, there is no way that you're going to be getting anywhere near what we require under the New Zealand minimum quality standards of 200 CFUs per gram. It's just, you're not going to meet that. But if you are a legacy cultivator and you are clean with what you're doing, then there's every opportunity for you to be meeting that. However, in order to export it, you have to meet the New Zealand minimum quality standards, which stipulate that it is 200 CFUs per gram, which is prohibitive unless you're exporting it as a tea, using subsection 5.1.8c of the European Pharmacopoeia. But again, it's It's kind of complicated because in certain other countries, they have other requirements. Here in New Zealand, you've got to meet our more stringent requirements in order to get it to these other countries and things like that. And so if you have an offtake agreement with somebody, then you've got to also keep that in mind, that even if your offtake agreement doesn't specifically stipulate that, if your offtake buyer is trying to then sell it internationally, you will have to have those strict things adhered to. It's unfortunate, it's just the way that it is at the moment, but yeah. And they mention here THC depends on the product, to be defined for each product. So they're providing a bit of flexibility. What I would recommend is that you're shooting for a minimum of like 20% THC if you are looking to go into this and get yourself an offtake agreement in the current medicinal cannabis landscape in New Zealand. Yeah. Anyway, that's I think we keep coming down here. They'll do press announcements. Yeah. Nothing else too exciting. I'll include links to this down in the description below. If you do have any questions or comments, feel free to sing out. Would love to have a bit of a chat with you in the comments below. Hit like, hit subscribe, and we'll talk to you in the next video. Take care, everybody. Cheers.